There is nothing wrong with jazz. Jazz's popularity has nothing to do with the music itself. The truth is, jazz is alive and flourishing, perhaps not in the same commercial realm as something like hip hop or other music that reaches globally a lot more people. Nevertheless, there's a whole lot of people on this planet who love jazz, and there's a lot of people on this planet who play jazz because it's fun to play. It's challenging. So this has nothing to do with the music itself. You know, there's some really, most of my videos on here are the masters, so to speak, my generation, close to that. I'm not in New York City anymore. I'm not totally tuned into exactly what's happening, but I know from the nightly webcasts that I watch from Smalls and Mesro, which is one type of jazz, for lack of better expression, pretty much straight ahead jazz, which is what I'm rooted in. But there's all kinds of different things happening. I mean, and a lot of young people. So I'm not worried about jazz. Sonny Rollins once told me you can't kill a spirit. Jazz is a very powerful spirit. It touches many. But I think there are some reasons why it's not reaching more people than it is. So I'm going to talk about that, and then I'm going to go to your comments here. People already started, leave a couple of comments. So you may disagree, or you agree, or you have some other ideas. I look forward to hearing them. First of all, let me say, first point I want to make here is that we are overwhelmed with content at this point. There is more content available for people to choose from than ever before. First of all, musically, on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, all of these other destinations, Amazon Music, you can hear just about anything. On YouTube, people put up recordings, entire recordings, which don't benefit musicians financially. I'm not going to talk about that aspect of it today, although I'd like to get into that. I think it's important to talk about. But the fact that there is an abundance of content. In fact, there's too much content. You know, people are like overwhelmed. And certainly no quality control. I mean, it's up to the viewer or the listener to decide what they want to hear, what they like, what they don't like. Listening to music, I think, is a very subjective thing. What sounds good to me might not. I mean, I dig Albert Ayler. I don't dig Kenny G. Somebody who digs Kenny G might not dig Albert Ayler. That's fine. That's an individual's choice. But we're totally overwhelmed with content, and I think unless you really know what you're looking for, sometimes, unless somebody says, "Hey, check this out." You know, viral marketing has always been the strongest type of marketing. When someone says, "Hey, check this out," you know, check out this J.J. Johnson recording or whatnot. That's how we find out about it. I don't know how many people are exploring, although when you don't have to pay for it, you are probably more likely to explore. You know, on YouTube, you always get the recommendations on the side there, which is both good and bad. Which goes to my second point, and that is the attention span of people on the internet. Well, the attention span in general is like diminishing. People just, with my videos, and this holds true with other videos as well, except for maybe cooking videos or plumbing videos or something like that, where someone's watching videos to learn. People watch, like, I lose 50% of the audience after the first minute. And then until the video ends, the viewership goes down. Until the end of the video, only 20% of the audience remains. Now, I myself sometimes do the same thing. I'll check something out. It's not that interesting, and then I'll leave. But what happens with music is people don't give the music a chance. They'll give it 30 seconds, they'll give it a minute, and then, doesn't really grab them. That is not a good thing. So the attention span is less. You know, jazz is not something that grabs you I mean, it can get your attention, but I don't say it takes work, but unless you really know what it's about, it takes a minute to get into it. Most people do not have the same attention, the same interest that they used to. I mean, it's really difficult to get people's attention. I mean, I just did a documentary film. Hardest thing, getting people to watch it, getting people to watch the whole thing. The film was an hour and 17 minutes long. When I put it up on YouTube for a while, before I started entering the film festivals, that I couldn't do that, people would watch 5 minutes, 10 minutes. That's it. They're gone. Also, some people watch the first few minutes, like it, and then they bookmark it and say, I'll come back. They never come back. It just doesn't work that way. Why? Because there's so many other things to see. And I can't blame YouTube, because YouTube's a business, although I don't like all of their policies. I like, honestly, there's less censorship on YouTube than there is on Facebook. I am like one small step away, away from being kicked off Facebook for good. I've already been banned from Twitter because I'm not afraid to express myself. And people sometimes report me, or I violate Facebook's community standards. I really haven't had that problem on YouTube. Of course, I'm not really advocating a violent revolution or sexual intimidation or anything like that. No one should be complaining about me. But Facebook, I've had it with Facebook. YouTube, more opportunity. But what this thing about YouTube putting up different possibilities on the right side of the screen, at least when you watch it online, on Facebook, on TV, is an entirely different experience. I think people who watch Facebook on TV probably spend more time watching the video. But it's kind of like, it reminds me of the story of the actor in Los Angeles at a Hollywood party, talking to people. And while he's talking to someone, he's looking around the room to see if there's someone more important to talk to. And that's, in essence, what kind of happens here with videos on YouTube. When you're looking at the recommendations on the right, subtly you're thinking, is there something else I should be watching that I could get more from? Now that statement, getting more from, what do I get from this? And that brings up my next point here, and that is that people are addicted to the dopamine rush they get from content, whether they're posting content on Facebook and they're checking to see, oh, how many people responded to, how many people saw what I posted? What did people say? Or they're just looking for some kind of thrill that they get when they watch a video about a particular subject, not necessarily pornography. You don't find pornography on YouTube, but there's no shortage of porn on the web. That's another subject completely. But people are like looking for kind of, this rush that they get when they post something or see something. And where's my phone? Do I have my phone here? I must have plugged it in to recharge it. But that phone, in 2007, two things happened to change the world. And we are now dealing with the effects of those two things all over this planet. And that is the invention of the smartphone. And that's what 2007 is, when social media totally jumped off. Those two things have caused a profound difference in the world. Certainly, having the smartphone, a computer in your hand, being able to do everything that a smartphone can do, it's great. And social media, great to connect with people, but there's some negative aspects to this as well. And I don't know what's going to happen in the future with these. I do know that it's pretty obvious that in, I don't know how long it's going to be, 10 years. I think I mentioned this last week, 10 years or 15 years, in an attempt to get corporate control out of this, corporate control of what he calls the metaverse. Mark Zuckerberg, the force behind Facebook, is going full steam ahead with this idea that, you know, pretty soon we're going to jump into this virtual reality space. And, you know, when jazz first came out, I think that when the internet first came out, my idea was this is going to be great for jazz. And in a way it has been, because it gives people access to the music in a way that they never had before. And that's a really good thing. And I think when we get into that virtual reality space and people can actually go to concerts, you know, unless you live in a big city, or you go to like a jazz festival, like the North Sea Jazz Festival, or one of the many jazz festivals around the world, you really can't hear the music live. Virtual reality will give people the experience of actually being in the club, seeing what it feels like. Now, there aren't as many jazz clubs as there used to be. I don't want to say that's one of the reasons jazz isn't as popular, although it certainly is a factor. Why aren't there more jazz clubs? Because people have moved away from going out for their entertainment because they can get everything in the house. They don't have to leave. I mean, you could be lazy and watch webcasts. I mean, I don't get to New York as much as I like, but I love the fact that I can watch that nightly webcast from my two clubs on 10th Street, Smalls and Mesro. And once in a while, other webcasts as well. I think that's fantastic. And I think when virtual reality comes in, people are going to be hanging out at clubs. They're going to be talking to other musicians, to other people who dig the music. The social part of it will be there. That'll be the next boost for the music in terms of helping to expand the audience. Now, part of the reason that I don't want to say jazz is diminishing in popularity, but at the onset of the internet and what's happening today, the biggest part of the jazz audience is aging. Now, I happen to be 72 years old. I don't fucking believe it. I feel pretty good. I've survived prostate cancer, open heart surgery. I'm still going strong, thankfully. But a lot of older people who listen to jazz are leaving us. Nobody lives forever. A lot of our great jazz masters are leaving us. I mean, some of our greatest masters, well, there's two people in particular I think of, our elders like Sonny Rollins and Benny Golson. They're both in their 90s. They're not gonna be here forever. Sonny can't play anymore because of a respiratory problem. Benny Golson's still out there doing it. Then you got people in their 80s, like Herbie Hancock, Wayne Shorter. They're not gonna live forever. Both have continued to create. Herbie's still going. I mean, Herbie's out with the band, and Wayne collaborated with Esperanza Spalding on an opera that was in New York and LA, and hopefully will be more places. And someday I'll talk about Wayne Shorter in more detail. I've had the honor to spend time with him, some really great quality time. Incredible man, and he's still with us, but these people are not going to be with us forever. And we got to celebrate them and enjoy them while they're here. Of course, their music is eternal. But my generation, the baby boomer generation, we did not embrace jazz like our elders. This was because in the 1930s and 40s, jazz was the popular music, the form of jazz called swing music with the big bands. A lot of people enjoyed dancing and listening to jazz, and it was really, really popular. And then, and of course, a lot of incredible musicians came out of the big bands and went on to, the economics of it changed. Smaller groups became more viable. It became more difficult to put a group of musicians on the road. And also, my generation, we were the generation of the Beatles and that whole thing that happened. We weren't into jazz, although there was an attempt to bring more people under the tent of jazz in the late 60s and 70s with the advent of fusion music or jazz rock or whatever you want to call it. That was a very, very exciting time that I was present for, when Miles recorded In a Silent Way and Bitches Brew and Herbie and Chick and Weather Report and Mahavishnu Orchestra and just incredible. And a lot of people who listen to rock music dug that. Miles and Charles Lloyd and a bunch of other people played it to Fillmore East and Fillmore West. So in an attempt to get more people into the music, also because they just wanted to like bring in some new life to the music, that thing happened. Now, what also happened after that point was what I would call, I hate to categorize things, and that is another reason why it's difficult to bring a big audience to jazz. I'll talk about that in a second. Was this advent of smooth jazz? You know, I was one of the first people who worked on a major jazz website that Larry Rosen, who with the popular, the talented pianist composer Dave Grusin, formed GRP Records, and they developed this commercial form of music that had some jazz elements called smooth jazz. That was the debut of Kenny G and that whole thing. And for people who found regular jazz a little too much, they liked it. It remains popular. I personally don't enjoy listening to it. There's a lot of really good musicians who play that music, certainly. And as jazz radio stations started to disappear with the disappearance of jazz clubs, fewer jazz clubs, we also lost in the past 20, 25 years, a lot of the jazz stations that were on the radio. When I was a young guy growing up in the early 60s, that's one of the ways that I found out about the music. I would listen to the nightly Golden Sound of Jazz on WCCC-FM with John Burchard. And that's how I found out about Cannonball and Coltrane and Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers. And there was a DJ, and he would talk about the music, and he would give the personnel, and commercially that became no longer viable. National Public Radio stepped in. There were a lot of jazz stations on NPR, and then NPR, in response to the rise of conservative talk radio, our friends, I don't want to say our friends, they're our enemies. Well, like Rush Limbaugh and Bill O'Reilly and Glenn Beck, they said, we gotta stand up to that. So NPR became essentially talk radio for liberals and is in opposition to the whole thing. And we lost most of our jazz stations. There are very few full-time jazz stations in the United States and around the world, basically just a handful. But that has been replaced by radio stations on the internet. They're not terrestrial radio stations, but many, many countries all around the world have jazz stations on the web. Very easy to get it, very easy to listen to. TuneIn Radio is one way you can access them. Apple Radio, part of Apple Music. So there are radio stations, but they're different than the radio stations that I grew up listening to because you don't find much talking about the music. I think that's important. You know, when I was, the other aspect of why I think jazz might have lost a bit of an audience is because the way that we actually purchase the music. Back in my day, and when I was a teacher, I taught for 5 years at a local college here, documentary filmmaking. And when I first started teaching, I noticed the big difference culturally between my students and myself. And whenever I would say, well, I remember when I was a kid, they didn't want to hear that. They had, that was like, when I was a kid, I didn't want to want to be lectured about, well, in my day. But there's some truth there in that the way people bought music before the advent of CDs, we're going back to LPs, maybe the beginning of cassettes, you would go to a record store. That was a social experience. You would meet other jazz listeners there. You would talk amongst yourselves about the music. And there was usually an expert there, somebody who was selling the music who could say, oh, check this out. Oh, you like Charles Lloyd? Let's check out Yusef Lateef. Check out Rosamund Kirk. And they played in the store for you. You'd hear it, and you'd probably want to buy it. You liked it. So that was, that's another aspect of why, another aspect of why the music isn't where it should be. Another part of this is jazz is a word that describes a lot of different kinds of music. Because jazz exists in the commercial marketplace, those who sold jazz had to like put labels on it. Like when Dizzy Gillespie and Charlie Parker were first playing bebop in the mid 40s, and someone, what they were doing, which was radical at the time, they had a lot of detractors. Well, that's not music. Nevertheless, it got the name bebop, and Duke Ellington told them, once they put a label on it, you're finished. Because what it does is it kind of segments the audience. So you got bebop, you got straight ahead jazz, you got hard bop, you've got avant-garde music or free jazz, you've got fusion, you've got Latin jazz, you've got world jazz, you've got vocal jazz, all these different things, more than I can name here, which segments the audience, so to speak, and makes it more difficult for people to figure it out. Like, what is jazz? Because I meet people and they say, well, I don't like jazz. Well, what did you hear? Maybe what you heard was not something that your ear that spoke to you, but there was probably another type of jazz that you would dig. Back in at Slugs, I guess it was 2 months before Lee Morgan was killed. I think Lee Morgan was killed in 1972. Keith Jarrett's quartet was playing at Slugs. His American quartet, he had the Dewey Redman and Charlie Hayden and Paul Motion. That was a great band. And Guillermo Franco was a percussionist. And Keith Jarrett at that time, this is after he left Miles, kind of straight ahead, but also kind of adventurous. And I was driving a cab. I was a New York City cab driver at the time. By the way, look for my movie, Rough Ride, here on my channel. When I was going to film school, I was driving a cab at night, going to school during the day. Anyway, I had a friend who was a cab driver, and I was going to, he said, I told him, I'm going to go down to Slugs and hear Keith Jarrett this weekend. He said, who's that? I said, well, you could come, but I'm not sure you're going to like it. He said, okay, I'll give it a shot. We went to the club. We sat right in front of the bandstand. This was a guy who was heavily into rock and roll, as I was at the time. I mean, I'm a child of the 60s. I loved all the Jimi Hendrix. I got a chance to see Hendrix live, and The Who, and Procol Harum, and Electric Flag, and some really great music back then. This guy was into that. So he sat down. He had no basis in jazz or improvisational music. What he heard there and felt there was so powerful, it grabbed him, and he was blown away by it. He became a jazz fan just from that experience. My feeling is that when people actually hear the music live, they feel differently about it than if someone says, oh, check this out. It reaches them in a visceral kind of a way. And Mulgrew Miller, I did an interview, I forget which of my videos about Mulgrew Miller. I talk about this. He talks about this, that he's seen how people can get really turned on jazz who know nothing about it. Now, we are in the era, we don't have that many clubs anymore, but we do have a lot of jazz festivals. But what's happened to jazz festivals is to make them more commercial. Sometimes 80% of the music that's played is not jazz in any way, shape, or form. They bring people in with these other groups I won't name, but they're more pop oriented or more R&B oriented. I mean, when I went to the North Sea Jazz Festival, which is a fantastic experience, by the way, because there's 13 different stages playing different music, different groups every hour, everything from a solo piano room to a stadium. I heard Earth, Wind, and Fire. This was when Maurice White was still alive. Maurice White was a jazz drummer. He played with Ramsey Lewis. And there were some jazz elements in Earth, Wind, and Fire, certainly. And people loved it. But some would say, well, it's not real jazz, not pure jazz. I'm not going to get into what is pure jazz, what is not. I'm just happy people like the music, get something from it, and they listen to it. And these jazz festivals be they the fact that they're not totally jazz, that's okay. Maybe that will open something up to people that will get them to hear the music. So I think there's a combination of these different factors. There's another factor as well that I think may be the most important factor, and that's what I call, well, there's actually two things here I want to talk about. One is our culture is a celebrity-oriented culture now. People are more focused on what a celebrity is doing more than a cultural aspect. Herbie Hancock wrote a letter or an editorial someplace and talked about this very thing. What people seek out now is culture. In our culture is celebrities. Celebrity has become like all important. I don't have a very high opinion of most celebrities. In fact, I would like to see most celebrities and politicians line up, get into a rocket ship, get off this planet, and leave forever. I don't like celebrities. I don't like politicians. But nevertheless, people tend to coalesce around certain personalities. One of the reasons that jazz became popular in the early days was because of one man, and his name was Louis Armstrong. Louis Armstrong, in addition to being a great musician, had an incredible personality. I mean, when I was a little boy, 8 years old, my family used to watch a show on Sunday night at 8 o'clock called The Ed Sullivan Show. This is a variety show, different performers on there, comedians and acrobats and ventriloquists and different types of music. And someone who was a regular on that show was Louis Armstrong. And I didn't know anything about the music. I mean, my dad was a musician. There was music in my household. But when I saw Louis Armstrong, something about that really grabbed me. I wanted to like climb into the TV set and become part of that. And not long after that, my parents, I think it was 1959 or 60, they bought their first hi-fi. And they bought two records. One was the soundtrack from the Broadway show of My Fair Lady, and the other one was Duke Ellington Plays the Nutcracker Suite. I didn't know Duke Ellington, but I knew the Nutcracker Suite, which is a staple among holiday concerts. And I knew it. I'd heard the Nutcracker Suite many times. And hearing Duke Ellington play it, it was like, what is that? What is that? That was wild. And that kind of like between Louis Armstrong and Duke Ellington, that became, part of my journey for getting into jazz. And I was lucky in that I grew up in a place that was halfway between New York and Boston. I had an opportunity to see live jazz. By the time I was 15, I'd already seen Duke Ellington, Count Basie, Maynard Ferguson, Stan Kenton, Cannonball Adderley, Sonny Rollins, Booker Ervin, just fantastic. That was really wonderful. I'm so lucky. And the last thing I'm going to mention before I go to your questions and comments, and I can see people have been participating here, thank you very much, is that I think the way people listen to music in general has an impact. And that's one of the negative aspects I think about the technology, and that's the MP3 file, which condenses the music because it's transportable, easy to put up on the web, to share and so forth, but takes a lot of the dynamics out of the music. Some of us used to listen to music on a stereo system with a turntable and an amplifier and maybe a preamp and some really great speakers. And it was more of an audio experience. And I think when you listen to music that way, you hear things. I think, first of all, it helps you to focus your attention on it. And you hear things that you normally wouldn't hear. All of a sudden, the MP3 file came along, and also the smartphone, and people began just to listen to their music on their smartphones, sometimes with headphones, sometimes not. But I think that diminished the music in a number of ways. And now I have a very talented cousin named David Chesky. You may know his music. David and his brother Norman formed an audiophile label called Chesky Records. They specialized in recording music with fantastic microphones and releasing it in a way that great. Of course, if you had a good stereo system, that would help. With all this condensed music, difficulty for them to keep that going. So they put up a website that I highly recommend called HD Tracks. When you buy MP3 files on there, when you buy files on there, you can get them in other formats. So the music is not compressed. It costs $1 or $2 more, but you get a much greater audio experience. They have FLAC files, they have AAFF files, and the music sounds better. I highly recommend that. But here's the sad part. Most people do not buy music anymore. Most streaming came along. And I remember when Napster first came out, and I embraced it. I mean, certainly the opportunity to download all these files. There's always a lot of blowback against the record labels. If you liked one song on an album, you had to buy the whole song. I had to buy the whole album. People would say, "Oh, well, record labels make enough money," and then all of a sudden, well, I don't know. I'm getting a report that my sound is in and out. Hello, 1, 2. Let me see here. Okay, I'll get closer here. I don't know what's going on with my microphone, but I lost my train of thought. Oh boy, that's what happens here. Oh, some people still buy music. Most people don't. Most people get it. People want convenience now. Convenience became more popular than quality. The convenience of I can just get. Let me see if I can make an audio fix to my audio here to fix my volume here. Give me 1 second here. Sound. Okay, how about that? Let me go with my input. Oh, okay. I apologize for not being louder. That's probably going to be better. Okay, where was I here? All right. No, I don't know. For some reason, the audio is not being picked up on the live stream. I was doing live streams for a while using different software, and I stopped doing that. It was just too much for me. One-man band. So I've gone back to just one thing here at YouTube, using YouTube streaming. So for some reason, today's broadcast, the audio is a little low. I'll fix that. After I do this, I'll download it and up the audio and then repurpose it. Okay, let's go to some comments here. Henri de Lagardère, I can't pronounce his name. He says, democracy basically means government by the people, of the people, for the people, but the people are retarded. An Indian mystic named Oho said that. So Henri says, I think we can replace democracy with jazz and government with music. Well, I am certainly in favor of that. Although I love democracy, although it would appear democracy is soon going to be dead in the United States, it's going down in many other places in the world. Black and Blue opines, one among other issues might be that jazz, like all of the great art, usually requires that you put something into it in order to get something back. He's right about that. Maybe you can compare it with the relationships in families. You need to put some time and effort into it in order to get something back. And people are not willing, for whatever reason, to put something into it. They will never experience the great reward of families, deep friendships, and art. And he goes more into that and says, so maybe jazz not being popular is a symptom of larger societal and economic problems that result in people not being able and willing for various reasons to focus for longer periods of time to listen to appreciate. You got a good point there. I talked a little bit earlier about how people have diverted attention spans. They're looking for that dopamine rush. If they don't get it, they'll move on to something else. I think you have a good point there, Mr. Black and Blue. Interesting how some people will not put their name on their YouTube account. They have a little code name. I don't know what that means. John Riley, who's a drummer and a regular viewer on this channel, says, I think what passes for jazz for a lot of people is like lounge music, not too loud or swinging. But face it, if there are different types of what I would consider jazz that will freak people out, like when Miles went electric. Think how widespread music is, and it's all around us. Most people just take all music for granted. It's free, right? Right? I always tell my young musician friends, play for little or nothing. What is it? I always tell my young musician friends that play for little or nothing that my hot tub guy charges us $125 an hour. Yes, playing jazz is hardly a lucrative thing for most people. I don't think most people who play jazz do it for the money. They do it because they love music. And also jazz is interactively working in a group of musicians playing jazz is fantastic. Anyone who plays music will tell you that. Okay, Tony Boemi says, one thing that drove jazz was big personalities. I mentioned this. Like Ellington, Ella, Pops, Peggy, Buddy, Billy, Miles, Sinatra, Count, Benny, Mahalia, and so forth. That's long gone. Modern legends like Hancock, Corea, and so forth are also mostly gone. Tech has replaced the human spirit in the arts with small exceptions. Jazz is now like classical as a matured art, world too sophisticated for its own good. No Louis Jordan or Cab Calloway or Fats Waller. In a political nonsense world we are trapped in. Freedom is dead. Yeah, I got into a little bit before about how Louis Armstrong and that strong personality. But 2 weeks ago at the Grammys, a young man won a lot of Grammys. He is essentially a jazz musician who also does kind of music. His name is Jon Batiste. We can watch him every night on Colbert. John is a fantastic musician. He's a great pianist, and he's a great spokesman for the music. And that's one thing that we've been missing. You know, I have a lot of respect for Wynton Marsalis and Jazz at Lincoln Center, but he is not the dynamic type of personality that people gravitate towards. Jon Batiste is. And we live in a cookie cutter culture. Back when the music started, you would have a tenor saxophone player. You knew what part of the country he was from because everyone sounded different. They didn't get, nowadays, everyone gets the same information. It's like the same stores, the same everything, you know, is in every place. We lack individualism. Jazz is the music of individuals. How many jazz musicians, younger musicians today, can you identify within 2 or 3 notes? I mean, when I hear Dexter Gordon, I know in a note or two. When I hear Joe Henderson, when I hear John Coltrane, when I hear so many musicians, I know who they are within a note or two. That's not true of today's young musicians, and I don't blame them. Okay, here is for one of our viewers, Lawrence Cohn, who's a tenor player who happens to live in Costa Rica, an expat. I will soon be joining the ranks of expats when I move to Mexico in 4 weeks. Lawrence says, lots of reasons why jazz is not popular, but one of them is simply because the vast majority of today's jazz is incredibly boring. Well, I'll get back to that in a second. Too much math and not enough poetry. Young hipsters got these monster chops for what? So they can play fast. Nobody cares. The public doesn't want to hear some cats play moment's notice at 300 beats per minute. It's boring as fuck. Develop their chops in order to manifest a personal style and melodic and sound conception, not chops for their own sake. Today's jazz has lost the cultural connection to blues and R&B. The jazz needs to be expressive and emotive. There needs to be more emphasis on playing expressively and stylistically, and less emphasis on speed and chops and technique. Hyper-competitive, athletic corporate culture has damaged jazz badly with things like the monk competition. That should have zero place in jazz. I was listening to Errol Garner the other day, and the cat played piano with magical expressiveness and a personal style. That's missing today. Well, there are some, I don't want to say that the vast majority of today's jazz is incredibly boring. I don't think so. But some of it is. Some of it is just about technique and chops and playing fast. And there's more to it than that. One of my favorite parts of jazz are ballads. You don't really hear ballads played that much anymore because people like, oh, it's too slow. We're going to lose people if we play something too slow. Well, I miss ballads. I miss expressions. Okay, now I'm going to go to the chat and pick up some comments here. Axel Azarin says, he quotes from a painter who's a big jazz fan named Ted Jones, who said, "Jazz is my religion and surrealism my point of view." That is a great quote. Richard Norflees, Michael Brecker is amazing, but we have no clue, and the people who know Michael Brecker are less and less. Well, Michael Brecker is a pretty popular guy all around the world. I'm doing I do a weekly Michael Brecker podcast. A lot of people dig Michael Brecker. I mean, what Michael Brecker did is play other kinds of music as well with James Taylor and Joni Mitchell and Paul Simon. I think he might have brought some music under the jazz tent, some listeners under the jazz tent like that. Richard Norflees also says, the paradigm regarding what is artistry, musical realm of taste has shifted. Culture is very, very different to what it was in the 40s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and where we are today. Boy, that is so true. I mean, you can't, things don't stay the same. I mean, whoever thought that in the year 2022, there'd be another Hitler on the scene? I mean, we thought we got rid of a dictator like Adolf Hitler. All of a sudden, we got Putin, in some ways worse than Hitler. And our friend in China, Xi Jinping, another potential really negative force. But we can't do anything about that. We cannot change the culture in terms of giant corporations controlling what we see. It's too much, too bad. Okay, Rodney Golden. Jazz is an esoteric art form. There's aspects of that, but jazz, comes from the blues. I think there's some feeling there that can't be disputed. Superman's daddy, I thought that was Joel. That was, in the first Superman movie, that was Marlon Brando. Says, I just discovered Anur, A-N-O-U-A-R, Brahman via YouTube, as well as obscure Italian jazz. Yeah, there's a lot of jazz on YouTube that we don't know about that you can check out. Rodney Golden says again, jazz could be regular, but it's not. There are as many people as there are opinions. You know what they say about opinions? Yeah, well, one thing, a couple of quotes about opinions. Opinions are like assholes. Everybody's got one. And then the other thing is put 3 Jews together in a room. You're going to get 5 different opinions. Richard Bell, I'm one step away from completely deleting my Facebook account. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Juan Garcia, jazz is full of color. Nice. While other music is in two only or simple. Jazz has infinite expression. I tend to agree with that. The complexity, the emotional content of jazz is much, much greater than most other music. More in line with classical music. Maybe that's too much for some people. I don't know. Superman's daddy is back with us a dearth of jazz clubs. Yeah. But there are small clubs and there are festivals. It's just that people don't go out like they used to. And also the economics of putting a touring band together isn't what it used to be. Let's see here. When I heard Zappa, okay, Frank Zappa. Speaking of Frank Zappa, I once at the Boston Globe at the Boston Globe Jazz Festival, I saw Rahsaan Roland Kirk jam with the Frank Zappa and the Mother's Invention, and they had no problem playing together. Axel says, when I heard that Zappa cited Cecil Taylor and Eric Dolphy as influences, I started sharing with people who taught me, and I think that curiosity to search beyond what is given is what is missing. People aren't as curious as they used to be. I certainly felt that with my students when I was a teacher. When I was growing up and getting into filmmaking, I was very curious about older filmmakers. I don't think young people have that same interest. Rodney Golden said, high art isn't for everyone. It never was. And people have as many reasons for listening to different forms of jazz. Okay, let's see here. What else we got here? Hello, Joyce. Okay. Willie Jordan, hip-hop ruined just about any chance for jazz to regain its status as a popular music. I would like to argue that groups that I grew up listening to, like Earth, Wind & Fire, had strong jazz-like elements. Yeah, I mentioned Earth, Wind & Fire. I think hip-hop and rap music are a very valid cultural form, but I don't find any emotional content in there. I don't find very much musical content. And that became the music of the Black community. And a lot of Black young people gravitated away from jazz because of that. I don't want to blame them, but as Richard Bell says, there are a few hip-hop artists that are utilizing some elements of jazz in their mixes, but most don't. Certainly, Kamasi Washington, who's a wonderful player and is popular, has elements of hip-hop and rap in his music. Josh R. I'm not a jazz guy at all. I really pushing myself to listen to artists like Jonathan Chrisberg and Pat Metheny, though it doesn't speak to me that much. Well, there may be other artists that do. Give it a chance, check out some other things. Axel says, jazz is a completely marginal art form here in Argentina, just like all kinds of instrumental, ethnic, and experimental music. Sad. When the music education component was dropped from education in America, I think we became a lot stupid cultural. Americans became a lot more stupid culturally. In Europe and Asia, more music education, more arts education in schools. I think people are more sophisticated. Perhaps that could be the popularity of jazz outside the United States could be attributed to that. Willie Jordan, live jazz is what turned me out as a 7-year-old. I was walking on the south side of Chicago past a home where a live band was playing. I've been hooked ever since. Yes, I said that before. Jazz is an incredible experience when you hear it live. Just got a few minutes here. Richard Norflies, man, I've been a player, spectator, and witness to the jazz phenomenon, not as a New Yorker. That's another reason jazz is dead, because the world doesn't relate to local New York culture. I'm not sure about that. Let's see here. Jazz has become a bit esoteric, yeah, in some ways. Okay. Max, who's making wax, hopefully, says there's a scene in a modern Netflix series called I Think You Should Leave. One of the scenes is making fun of a jazz snob's pompous negs on the dinner party host's record collection. Speaks volumes. Yeah, I would say some people have this perception that jazz is the music of snobs. No, if you don't listen to jazz, you're not hip, you're not cool. Well, I don't agree with that. And I don't look down on people. Whatever people want to listen to. I mean, let's face it. Music makes people happy. Music makes people feel good. It usually doesn't inspire people to kill each other, although there is some music that's kind of angry. Here's a comment. Several years ago, there was a film called Whiplash that had some popularity about a crazy teacher driving a drummer crazy. It reminded me of the film critic of the New Yorker who was furious about jazz in a lot of films and got mad at Whiplash for putting up Buddy Rich. Wow, yeah. Mike Mack, I'm a classical musician. I'm learning jazz guitar, and a huge mistake as long as the guitar his concern is to learn seventh chords as rigid forms. I think the right way to approach jazz is with triads. I'm not a musician. I can't speak to that. But I'm glad that you are learning and trying different things. And I think that's one of the great things about jazz, if you learn the music, is that it encourages you to try other things. It doesn't lock you into a rigid thing. For those of you who are learning about jazz, I highly recommend the series I did of videos of the pianist Hal Galper here on my channel, which you can check out. So I'm talked out here. It's been going on for about an hour now. I want to thank everyone for stopping by. I may revisit the subject again in a future broadcast. I'm not sure what I'm going to talk about next week. Maybe I'll talk about how jazz musicians are getting screwed by technology companies. You know, it used to be the record labels that fuck jazz musicians. Now it's Apple, Google, Spotify. You know, on Facebook sometimes some of the music that a lot of musicians are on there, and they post their royalty checks. Randy Brecker, who's on many sessions, you know, royalty checks 18 cents, 24 cents. That's a major injustice. Meanwhile, I think the average salary for somebody working at Spotify is like $120,000 a year. The secretaries at Spotify make $120,000 a year. Wow. So yeah, I think I'll talk about that next week. I think I'll talk about how the digital landscape has made it much more difficult for musicians to make a living. You know, when the internet came along, it's going to level the playing field. That is total bullshit. It didn't level the playing field. It made it harder. But there are some things that can be done. And, this is such a nice comment. If there is a God, I highly doubt it, Willie Jordan says, I want him to bless Bret for his tireless efforts at jazz expansion. Well, I appreciate that. You know, I appreciate the kind comments people leave about what I do here. I love jazz. I always have. It's always been a major part of my life. And somehow I found a way to like take my filmmaking jazz, put it together as a jazz video guy. I've got thousands of jazz videos, is it 10 million? Oh, 50 million. Yeah, 50 million views. Somebody's watching. It's not my relatives hitting the go button all the time. People from 167 countries. So I'm going to continue to do this as long as I'm on this planet. After I leave, these videos will be up on YouTube. And I want to say that, you know, share the music. That's important. And that's all I got to say today, everybody. Thanks very much for listening, for your support of me, for your support of the music. Cool videos coming up this week with the Clifford Jordan Big Band on Tuesday. The Anti-Semites Hall of Fame with Henry Ford, who hated jazz. I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. Thursday, an incredible version of Softly as the Morning Sunrise, so with Mulgrew. And on Friday, another episode of my Michael Brecker podcast with Michael Pattison, who's somewhere out there today with more of his thoughts about Michael, focusing on the subject. You can't compare yourself to Michael Brecker. So stay healthy, keep listening, and let's try to love each other a little bit more.